Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, and happy holidays to you. A very Merry Christmas season for you and your family. We're getting ready to start our 12 days of nutrients. Today is day one. And as we go through these, we're hoping that they'll just be conversational. Our goal, guys, is that we give you things to think about, that we teach you to ask better questions, that you're looking for ways to make 2026 more profitable. A lot of things to look forward to. We're planning on bringing a ton of good information. As I start, I'll probably end with this on the last day. I'll run through the books that I use primarily. I use a lot of resources, but the 6 most common books that I use are the Western Fertilizer Handbook, The Anatomy of Life and Energy in Agriculture by Dr. Arden B. Anderson. And then in addition to that, we'll be looking from Donald Schrieffer from The Soil Up. We'll be looking at the Fertilizer Handbook put out by the Dry Fertilizer Institute. Hands-on Agronomy, a personal favorite from Neil Kinsey. We really do appreciate Neil and what he does. And last but not least, the Agronomy Handbook from Midwest Labs. And guys, you can grab this for $10, I think. You can order it from them, or if you so desire, you can just download it for free and print it. So you'd have the cost of your 3-ring binder, your ink, and your paper. As we launch off into this, guys, it's going to be fairly conversational. You can look forward to some really great Christmas sweaters. That's one of the things we appreciate. We hope that you enjoy a good Christmas sweater or a good Christmas hat or whatever it might be. I hope you're getting ready to put up some decorations and as we get ready to celebrate the season of the birth of our Savior. But throughout this 12 days here, we hope to share a lot of good information and hopefully bring great value to you guys that will help you ascertain how to do a job that makes you more cash. As we launch off into this, we're going to start with day one. Day one is nitrogen. It's the big one. It's the one everybody likes to put a lot on. It gets the most volume. It gets the most press, and we're well aware of those. I found a paper here that I printed off on the 14th day of December in 2016. So that's been some time ago, almost 9 years. And it's the roles of the essential nutrients in crop development. And so each night I'm going to try and start with these, and we're going to start doing the macronutrients again. And so what about nitrogen? What do they have to say about that? Well, we know that it's necessary for the formation of amino acids, and we know that's the building blocks of protein. It's essential for plant cell division and therefore vital for plant growth. It's directly involved in photosynthesis. It aids in the production and the use of carbohydrates, and it does affect the energy reactions within the plant. Some of the reasons that we know that we need it, and we're well aware of that. As we start looking at nitrogen, we are aware that it is abundant within our atmosphere. I guess I should say it that way. 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. As a matter of fact, above every acre of ground in the United States, there is 35,000 tons of nitrogen. That's a lot of nitrogen. And the fact of the matter is, guys, we've got a gob of nitrogen up there. We just got to figure out how to grab hold of it, utilize it, and run it correctly. And so as we start looking at this 35,000 tons, some people would say only 34,000. We'll give or take 1,000 tons. So there's somewhere between 68 million pounds and 70 million pounds. So there's a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere. Oh, side note, for all the people who are freaking out about CO2 in the atmosphere, here's a little trivia fact. You can look this up on Dr. Google about anywhere and ascertain the answer to the question is, how much CO2 is in the atmosphere? How much CO2 is in the atmosphere? Just a little trivia question for your holiday get-togethers. The fact is, it is 0.04%. That's the amount of CO2 that is in the atmosphere. Knowing that we need CO2 for plants, that's kind of an interesting fact too. But as we start looking at this, that is 4/100ths of 1%. 4/100ths of 1% is CO2. Back to nitrogen. As we start looking at some of what people have to say here, we'll start with Don Schrieffer. And I do appreciate all the work that he does and has done in the past. And he talks about the fact that nitrogen is a growth element, just like that sheet that I read you said. Nitrogen is a growth element beyond the shadow of a doubt. That's not always a good thing. An excess of nitrogen will accelerate vegetative growth. Excessive top growth can create deficiencies in other nutrients, setting the stage for diseases, insects, and reduced yields. It is particularly damaging when applied too early in the life of a plant. A small root system cannot gather in sufficient quantity of nutrients to support a nitrogen-accelerated top growth. Our goal is to grow roots first and avoid forcing the top growth until the soil conditions favor microbiological activity and nutrient release. Timing and placement of nitrogen are very important. Without a question, according to Donald Schriefert, nitrogen is the most mismanaged element in agriculture. Guys, let's break that down for a minute. This would make the case for multiple applications. Now, I understand there are some people who are farming point rows and terraces and hills, and so a side dress doesn't work. And if you have to front load your nitrogen, we understand that. Guys, we are firm believers that there is no one size fits all in agriculture. We firmly believe that. And we have to do what we have to do. However, there is a difference between doing what we have to do and doing what's easy because we want to take the easy way out. And so I think we can make the case here for multiple applications. If we're going to do this in a way that's the most judicious, we would put on a small amount up front, maybe 30 to 60 pounds. We favor more towards the 60 because that gives us a longer window to get back in there. But when we read this and we read other books, and we'll see this too, when we front load all of that nitrogen, we increase vegetative growth. When we increase vegetative growth, the plant cannot, because that's early in the year and it's cold and the microbiology hasn't kicked in yet, the nutrients aren't releasing, there is no way to get enough of the other nutrients in there to help compensate for that shortage that's created by too much vegetative growth. Just a little sidebar making the case for slowing it down and putting it on over the course of time. We also want to talk about this on, as you move on back in here to some other things that Donald wrote. He talks about the conversion process, that we convert ammonium to nitrite, which is brought about by the Nitrosamona bacteria. The nitrite is then converted by the Nitrobacter bacteria to nitrate, which is negatively charged. In other words, the nitrogen starts out as a cation or a plus charge and ends up as an anion or a minus charge. And so when we're looking at this conversion process, that's how it switches over from, even if we're using all ammonium form N, urea, NH3, whatever it might be, we do get a conversion. And it converts very quickly above 50. And make no mistake, guys, the fact that it doesn't convert as quickly doesn't mean that it stops converting at 49 degrees. It continues to convert. We continue to suffer that opportunity for loss. And we need to be thinking about that as we walk forward in our nitrogen program. He talks about the fact that broadcasting excessive nitrogen is going to destroy the soil humus and the tilth. And he talks about the fact that when excessive nitrogen is present, the organisms in the soil will multiply if they have access to carbon for energy. The ideal method to decay carbonaceous residues, such as corn stalks, is to spray a liquid nitrogen directly on the plant prior to incorporation. That minimizes the bathing of the entire soil with too much in. He's talking about the soil digester or the stock digester that we push. We talk about how to build your own stock digester. There are a lot of stock digesters out there that work. I don't have any question about that. Some of them are really good. But one of the things that we can do is build our own with a base of about 5 gallon of 28 or 32. And when we do that, we spray that, even if we're going to work our ground in the fall, if we're going to incorporate those into the soil to speed up that decomposition, which is a great plan, I think, unless you're no-tilling, obviously. And guys, make no mistake, we're not here to preach minimum till, maximum till, no-till. We do favor the less tillage, I will say that. However, that being said, putting some nitrogen on with a couple of other things in there can really speed up that decomposition and make things work way better for you. He also goes on to say that he believes, and we do too, that the triad of nitrogen, phosphorus, and zinc will always function better in a combination than when used individually. We believe that nitrogen functions best in the presence of phosphorus. Since phosphorus is necessary for energy release within the cells, its adequate uptake during periods of rapid vegetative growth is most important. Our primary concern is to prevent luxury feeding of nitrogen, which could force excessive vegetative growth, which will cause a multitude of deficiencies. While the combination of nitrogen, phosphorus, and zinc is particularly effective, this does not minimize the need for other elements. I received a newsletter this past summer or actually this past spring, and someone had sent it out, and they were actually pushing the higher, increasing the nitrogen rate, saying use more, use more, use more. And guys, fundamentally, I have a lot of issues with that. I don't think that it takes, very rare is the time when it would take 1 pound of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. I think that we are doing ourselves a huge disservice when we're letting nitrogen get into the groundwater. And you can say, well, I don't care about the environment. Well, first of all, we should all be concerned about the groundwater. And we should also be concerned about the economic ramifications of that, because any nitrogen going into the tile and going out the end of the tile there into the groundwater is just money thrown away. Why do we want to do that? I'm going to get up on my soapbox for just a minute. I think that there are a lot of people who are very smart and are working very hard to do some things. But one of the things they're trying to convince you to do is to go down at the end of your tile line next to the ditch. They'd like you to dig a big hole, and then they'd like you to fill the hole with a lot of wood chips. And those wood chips, ideally, will sequester the nitrogen and keep the nitrogen out of the water. Is that a good idea? It's a good idea to keep the nitrogen out of the water. I think it's a horribly stupid idea to sequester nitrogen in wood chips. Then what? I got a great idea. Let's put on the right amount of nitrogen, and let's sequester that nitrogen with the corn roots, hay, or the wheat roots, or the canola roots, or whatever it might be. But let's use what we put on. Why do we want to overapply? I get guys say, yeah, we put some on in the fall, but we know we're going to lose some, so we just put extra on. That does not make any sense to me. And the bottom line, I just read an article about an individual who's going to run, I think, for Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Iowa. And one of the things that he wants to do if he gets elected is he wants to put a tax on fall applied nitrogen so that the cost of fall applied nitrogen will be greater than the cost of nitrogen applied in the spring. And what do you say? You can get mad. You can say, oh, we don't like this. We think this is a terrible idea. I'm not going to get involved in that. Here's what I'm going to say. Anytime we don't regulate ourselves, someone else will regulate us. And we have got to come to grips with the fact that we are a very small percentage of the population, and we need to be figuring out how to get along with everybody else. And it comes back to the economic side. Pure and simple, why do I want to apply a nutrient and have it run away? Why do I want to spend my money to send nitrogen down the creek? As a matter of fact, talking about loss, my friend Kurt from over in Illinois sent me a page from North Dakota. This was at NDSU, and they determined that up there in the Fargo area, that the percentage of nitrogen that converts to nitrate in the fall, if nitrogen is applied there in Fargo or in that area on September 15th, that nearly 100% of the nitrogen converts over to nitrate. If they applied it October 1st, nearly 75% converted to nitrate. October 15th, nearly 50% converted to nitrate. November 1st, they still had 20% convert over. Guys, that's a lot of conversion into nitrate, and that nitrate's going out with the groundwater. That's the bottom line. Or it's going to denitrify and go back up into the atmosphere where we already have too much. So let's just compare Fargo, North Dakota, and Davenport, Iowa. And on the average, the daily normals between Fargo and Davenport, it will be just about 6 degrees on the average warmer in Davenport, Iowa than it is in Fargo on any given day. What does that mean? That means the loss goes up the farther south you go because we have warmer temperatures. And if you're north of Davenport, Iowa, you're north of Interstate 80, then you're in that zone. How about all of us who live south of 80? How about the ones who are south of 70? We are suffering significant loss with that fall applied anhydrous. I had a friend who went to a meeting of the Illinois Soybean Association, and he called me and was sharing that they had commissioned a study, and a 5-year study, and they had studied what nitrogen forms had the greatest loss. And they walked to the front of the room and they said, beyond the shadow of a doubt, fall applied anhydrous suffers the most loss by far, above and beyond anything else. And he shared that he went out into the hallway at break And the most common thing he heard being said was, they don't understand, my farm is different. My farm is different. This test was ran all over the state of Illinois. They didn't have a dog in the fight. They were trying to study something to help farmers. And the very people they were trying to help was arguing with the results of the test. Guys, we need to be honest with ourselves. We have a lot of people that do gas. I get that. And that's fine. But I just want us to have our eyes wide open. As we go into hands-on agronomy from Neil Kinsey, I got a couple of things I want to share here that Neil has written. He talks about the fact that oftentimes they find that the weak link in yield is not nitrogen, phosphate, or potash. It's not even calcium. He said he has clients whose soil tests show they do not need calcium. They used at least as much phosphate and potash, and invariably they were using too much nitrogen. But sulfur and micronutrients were the limiting yield. 4 different clients in southeast Missouri raised their corn yield in 3 years by 30 to 40 bushel when they started to use sulfur and micronutrients. That's the only change that they made. When the soil test showed certain fertilizers they could cut back on to save money, they spent that money on the micronutrients. Guys, we know that there's a limiting factor, and most of us are not suffering from a lack of N, a lack of P, or a lack of K. Or if we are, it's because it's self-induced with a management problem, not because of what we don't have. Guys, we know Mulder's ball exists. We know that there is a huge relationship between all of the different nutrients and how they interact with one another. We know that when we put on too much nitrogen, we know that that creates a shortage of potassium. And so if we overuse nitrogen, then we have to, that same newsletter that was trying to convince people that they needed to put on more nitrogen. If you went back 2 more pages, it said, and in the event that if you're using, a lot of nitrogen, you need to be utilizing extra potassium. So they were making the case that you put on a lot of N and therefore you have to put on a lot of K. I would make the case we use a judicious amount of nitrogen and use the right amount of potassium and save some money, especially in this environment that we're in right now. He went on to say, in his writings here, again, talking about the fact that the overuse of nitrogen will burn out the humus supply. It creams our organic matter. And he said that the humus is a big source for sulfur. The higher the humus content, the more sulfur we can hang on to. The bottom line remains the same. The overuse of nitrogen will burn out the humus supply and will destroy the storage system for sulfur. When we combine that with the fact that we're no longer getting sulfur from the atmosphere in ways that we used to, it's creating a great deal of pressure to make the case for using sulfur in addition to all the other nutrients that we've been using in the past. I love this little book, the Fertilizer Handbook. Guys, people say, where do I get that? All I can tell you is keep checking on Amazon. It's out of print. They don't print it anymore. We very much would like to get it reprinted, but haven't been able to get that accomplished yet. But they are talking in here about the different forms of nitrogen. Plants use 2 forms of nitrogen, nitrate, NO3, and ammonium, NH4. And with few exceptions, nitrate is the predominant form absorbed by the plants. Please know this, guys. A plant will respond. It will uptake nitrogen in either form. However, it will give you the best yield when it has a 50-50 mix. And so ideally, if we can hang on to that half ammonium, half nitrate, we can increase our yield because our plant doesn't waste energy converting nitrate into ammonium. So it goes on and talks about the characteristics, first of all, of nitrate, NO3. It's negatively charged. It is not readily absorbed by the soil. It is therefore free to move with the water. It can be denitrified in waterlogged soils, in other words, lost into the atmosphere as molecular nitrogen gas and nitrous oxide, the nutrient form used by plants in the largest quantity. It can also be tied up or chemically bound by soil microorganisms. Flipping over to NH4 or ammonium N, it's positively charged, therefore it's absorbed by the soil with only traces leached out. However, it rapidly neutralifies or converts over into nitrate above 50 degrees. Note it says rapidly at above 50. It doesn't say stops at 49. It can become fixed in some minerals and this unavailable to the plants. In certain alkaline conditions, it will form ammonia, which is lost into the air, and it can be tied up by microorganisms. Guys, when we are out here using these nutrients, we want to make sure we're using them in the right way. We want to make sure that we're doing something that's making us money. We want to be doing something that's making sense for all of us. And the overuse of nitrogen does not make sense. That's not something that we would like to be a part of from an economic standpoint. Again, here coming out of the agronomy handbook from Midwest Labs, they're not 34,000 tons, they're 35,000 tons, or 70 million pounds of nitrogen above every acre of ground. They talk about that in there. And they also, in regards to nitrogen, we'll talk about the fact that excess of nitrogen in relation to the balance of other plant food elements will cause many failures, such as lodging, low quality grains, low quality forages, low quality fruits, low quality vegetables. It will give you a decrease in disease resistance and delay in the maturity of crops. There's a lot of reasons not to overuse it. Our good friend Francis used to tell us, don't let people be a moron. The answer is not in putting more on. I do have a bias against anhydrous. I openly admit that. I had a neighbor who somewhat blinded when I was age 12 by an anhydrous failure. I had a personal problem with it when I was 19 years old and I was side dressing corn. Luckily, I escaped with no damage to my lungs or my eyes. I look at the situation that happened a few years ago, maybe 18 months ago, not sure, down in Teotopolis, Illinois, where there was an anhydrous tanker that wrecked and it killed a family. A woman lost her kids and her husband. He just opened the door, was the only thing that he did to see what all the ruckus was about, and it got him. We have other friends that we know, one person in particular who's had a family member who was killed by it. I don't think, guys, that the cheapness of it doesn't offset the risk. I don't think it offsets the responsibility that we have to our friends and to our neighbors, to our hired men as they're doing this. But throwing that aside, let's just talk finances. We know that we're going to have significant loss when fall applied. Guys, in regards to managing our nitrogen, we have to come up with a way that works for each individual. Again, there is no one size fits all. I wish that everybody could just go out and pre-apply everything and put it on all at once and everything would be grand and glorious and that would be easy. But the fact is, that's not reality. There are certain people who will have to. And if you're someone who has to front load your nitrogen, if you're farming point rows, if you're farming terraces, if you're farming all of the different things that create a need to not be able to side dress, then we understand that. However, if we're going to front load it, then we need to be using one of the 3 stabilizers that have been proven to work. And that's important. And by the way, we're going to talk about those stabilizers that do work and those stabilizers that don't work at our Fundamentals of Agronomy. We're actually going to be out in Central Ohio coming up here later in the week, and we're going to be in 5 different locations. And if you would like to attend one of those Fundamentals of Agronomy, reach out to us. We would love to talk to you about how you could go spend 2 days taking an in-depth dive into what it is that you can do to perhaps make another 15 to 50 bucks an acre this coming year. Guys, we know that nitrogen interacts with so many things. We know that having the right amount of zinc on is important when we do that. We know that it's really important to have the right amount of potassium. And I'm super excited. On day 2, we're going to do phosphorus, but I really am just jumping up and down to get into potassium. We've learned some new things this year, and I'm really anxious to talk about that. I'm going to dispel some myths that have been put forth. I've actually got a paper that I printed off where they actually did a study and came up with some, in my opinion, incorrect conclusions. And if you'll tune in, we'll talk about those and see if you agree with us or not. Guys, all of this is done in a spirit of sharing. We don't expect everybody to agree with everything that we do, but we are here hoping to bring you something to think about and something to make you more profitable. At any rate, we appreciate you guys for tuning in and giving us some time. We thank you very, very much. We look forward to talking to you again on day 2 when we talk about phosphorus. And we really do hope you're going to have the best of holidays. Merry Christmas.